Hello there, Kim Dodsworth, Queensland storyteller. Today's contributing author, Fred Archer of Bundaberg, really knows how to tell a good story. Not long ago we aired one that he wrote about a country policeman. Today it's a faithful dog story. I know you're going to enjoy it. A Dog Gets a Boy by Fred Archer of Bundaberg. Peter was in the doghouse, and all because of a mother. In a way this was understandable. Peter was a dog. The woman's husband was also in the doghouse, but after several years of marriage it was familiar surroundings for him. Peter had been following his golden rule of never speaking even when spoken to. It was a rule he was never known to have broken despite all provocations. It's true that he barked on occasion and had been known to growl at the postman. The latter was for the sake of tradition, but he had never spoken. They'd all been having their midday meal together as usual, Peter the dog, the husband, the mother and the baby boy. Peter, as always, was using his well-tried, liquid, pleading eyes at the husband to receive titbits from the husband's plate. The mother was, as always, objecting to this practice, and, as always, her husband agreed while continuing to feed Peter. Even this flagrant breach of authority might have been allowed to pass if the son with the full experience of 18 months of life behind him had not decided to copy his father. He also started feeding Peter, but off his own spoon. Peter, being a dog and therefore much more aware of hygiene than a small boy, didn't like the idea of eating off the spoon after the boy. He put up with the indelicacy and possible danger to his health for the sake of the future. Peter, like all dogs, had long cherished the idea of having a pet boy of his own. He'd been watching the lad's progress with satisfaction and was looking forward to when he could seriously begin obedience training. The mother, however, suddenly noticed that her baby's food was disappearing from his plate with unusual speed. She watched to see where he was putting it all. When she saw that he was stuffing half of his food into himself and the other half into Peter, and off the same spoon, she reacted most alarmingly. She immediately let out a horrified shriek of protest. At the same time, she attempted to kick Peter under the table, succeeding only in catching her husband solidly in the shin. While she undoubtedly hurt her husband, she managed to stub her toe a little at the same time. The injury, though slight, gave her sufficient justification to include her husband in her tirade against Peter. Her husband, despite several years of marriage training, foolishly suggested that while the baby and the dog were sharing the same spoon, there was probably very little danger of Peter catching any serious disease. For a brief moment, Peter almost spoke out to defuse the situation. He didn't, and his chance was gone. After only a short time, just long enough for the woman to take a very deep breath, Peter and her husband found themselves bundled outside to share the doghouse. The woman's promise that neither would ever be allowed into her house rang in their ears. The only difference between them was that for Peter, she meant it. The husband, being far better and more practised at grovelling than the dog, was admitted after a suitable time. She had, of course, warned her husband that they were not speaking. What she really meant was that he was not speaking. He never got the chance. She said it all. For a while, Peter was pleased to be outside. Then, as the afternoon wore on, so did the woman's voice. It was not loud except when her husband attempted to interrupt her verbal flow. Then it rose suddenly in volume and output. It penetrated throughout the house and beyond to where Peter was trying to take his accustomed nap in the heat of the afternoon. The voice could not be ignored. Peter tried standing up and circling around in his bed. This customary preamble to rest invariably made him feel sleepy. This time it failed. There was no escaping the woman's voice. Reluctantly, Peter decided that despite the heat, he would take a walk down the paddock. He loved these undisturbed acres, and was happy that the husband worked away from home rather than farmed the property full-time, as he would have preferred. It was full of places to explore and of things to hunt, grasshoppers, frogs, and at times snakes. But that afternoon there were no snakes in the paddock. Peter decided it was too hot for them, just as it was too hot for him to chase grasshoppers. Bored, he turned back towards the house, and he supposed the woman's voice. Peter must have been outside longer than he realized, for the house was quiet as he approached. He heard the breathing of the sleeping baby first. Peter knew from the little sounds that the baby made in his sleep that he was lying on the floor in his playpen. It had been placed just inside the door to catch the slight, cool breeze that often blew there. Suddenly, Peter was fully alert. There was an unfamiliar sound that worried him. Or had there been a sound? Peter was undecided. He had the feeling something was wrong. He moved to investigate. Peter halted at the open door. He had not forgotten the house was forbidden to him. Thinking about the woman and her threats made him slightly nervous, but he showed no sign of it as he stood and systematically searched the room with his eyes and ears. The baby in his playpen was making odd, snuffling baby noises as he sought his bottle. He found it, took a few loud, smacking sucks, breathed out contentedly, and was asleep again. Peter eased himself very carefully into the room, conscious of the tapping, scraping noise his long toenails made on the polished floor tiles. As the baby slept peacefully on, Peter moved very cautiously further into the forbidden house. He was only too aware of how lightly the mother slept, and didn't wish his own poor steps to betray him. On his left was the high dining table with its sets of matching chairs pushed under it. On his right was a sideboard, solid and squat. There was a bare 70 millimetres under the sideboard, too small a space for any enemy Peter need fear. He ignored this slight space to concentrate on the baby on the floor within the playpen straight ahead and the forest of chair and table legs on his left. The snake struck with frightening speed, spearing out of the innocent space beneath the sideboard. Peter's reaction was instantaneous. He instinctively leapt upwards so that the twin poisoned fangs flashed harmlessly beneath him. He pivoted in mid-air to land on one side of the snake. Just as quickly he retreated as the snake prepared to strike again. It had recovered itself with surprising speed after the failure of its first vicious ambush. Obviously, Peter was not the first dog the snake had fought. Equally obvious, it had won all of its previous fights. The snake didn't like the feel of the polished floor beneath. It had not given sufficient grip when it launched its first strike. Here the dog had the advantage, for it was used to the slippery surface. Peter advanced slightly, so that the snake dare not risk crossing the open floor to the forest of table and chair legs. The snake was forced to look around for other shelter and found it. The baby's playpen was close and offered excellent shelter. The space between the dowels was too narrow to permit the dog to enter, and the snake knew it need not fear the sleeping baby. It began to move towards the playpen. Peter saw the danger to his pet and rushed in. The snake was instantly prepared to strike, and Peter stopped. Neither moved. They were not close enough to risk attacking, but too close to risk retreating. It was a stalemate. The child's mother stumbled into the room. She didn't see the snake until she was bent over checking on her sleeping baby. She didn't see the snake until she was too close. For a moment she was frozen with fright. Then with one movement she snatched up her child, turned and ran screaming out of the room. The snake instinctively turned towards the moving woman. It was a mistake. The snake knew it immediately, but in that instant the dog had leapt. He jumped stiff-legged into the air to come down across the snake's body. Snap! The white bared teeth closed just behind the head, and the snake was dead. Peter had dragged the lifeless body into the open to lay out on the polished floor when the husband came charging into the room. He was still befuddled by sleep, having been roused by his wife's screams, "Snake! Snake!" Peter was nearly asleep that night, gorged with the food the woman had forced on him, and completely satisfied with himself. Suddenly, a dreadful thought struck him. What if the boy could not be taught to throw a stick for him to retrieve? That thought kept Peter awake for a while, until he remembered how the boy had acted that afternoon. It was one thing to stop crying when faced with an angry snake. It was quite another to stop crying in the face of his screaming mother. Such a boy would make a fine pet, Peter decided, and immediately dropped off to dream happily all night of killing snakes and training his pet boy. And that was A Dog Gets a Boy by Fred Archer of Bundaberg, Queensland. Thank you, Fred, for a great contribution. Please be tuned in again this time next week for another wonderful short story. I'm Kim Dodsworth.